This is for my Sunday school class for this coming Sunday, December the 9th. I don't know how we got so close to the date of each Sunday that I'm going to be preaching the text. I think it's because we've skipped a few Sundays here and there. So instead of a text a month out, we're now only the next week out. So the text that we'll be discussing Sunday the 9th are the pair of texts that are going to be used in worship on the 16th. So be that as it may, that's where we are. This is the season of Advent, and we're focusing on prophecies from the Old Testament prophets about the coming of the Messiah. All of these prophets are prophesying at different times into different instances. And for example, the text for Sunday, December the 9th in worship, the text from Malachi, Malachi is deeply concerned about the secularization of the culture and how no one seems to feel that there is a need for the culture to have a focus upon their God. Zephaniah's text is more of a focus on the secularization of their worship, and his great concern is about reform in the worship of the people of God. So, in fact, right there in the temple in Jerusalem. The prophecy of Zephaniah probably dates to 626 BC, about a decade before good King Josiah executed his reforms on the worship of the people, which brought the focus back upon their God, Yahweh. So Zephaniah is speaking first a tone of caution, and then this tone in chapter 3, beginning in verse 14, a very hopeful tone about what's going to happen in the life of the people as their worship returns. It begins, "Sing aloud, O daughter of Zion. Shout, O Israel. Rejoice and exult with all your heart, O daughter Jerusalem. The Lord has taken away the judgments against you. He has turned away your enemies. The King of Israel, the Lord, is in your midst. You shall fear disaster no more." And then as it moves on down, it speaks of hope for those who have been outcast, who are weak, who are oppressed. I'll just pick up a few of the lines here. "I'll remove disaster from you. At that time I will save the lame, gather the outcast, and will change their shame into praise and renown in all the earth." What's so fascinating to me about that text is that this is, in the end, a social movement that begins from the worship. And this social movement that begins from the worship really means that it is driven by their understanding and appreciation of their God. Quite the contrast to what Malachi sees, where nobody really cares about anything except themselves and doesn't see any linking at all between the treatment of other folks and their worship of their God and keeping God linked to their culture. The other element in the Zephaniah text that I think makes this text really special is this focus on the lame and the outcast at the end, and how it pairs with the words of John the Baptist in preaching out in the wilderness, and the response in particular of the people who come to John to hear him preach. So I'm going to go ahead and move now to the text from Luke at the beginning here in chapter 3. What is it? Luke 3, 7 to 18. This picks up on the text from that was used in worship the previous week. And as he is preaching about preparing the way for the Lord, every valley lifted up and all that, which we discussed in our last Sunday school class, he now turns to the crowd that has come out to be baptized by John. He calls the crowd a brood of vipers. Who warned you to flee from the wrath to come? And then the most fascinating piece, which is where it pairs with the Zephaniah text about the lame and the outcast. The crowds asked him, this is in verse 10, "What then shall we do?" And in reply, John said to them, "Whoever has 2 coats must share with anyone who has none, and whoever has food must do likewise." Then it says, "Even tax collectors came to be baptized, and they asked him, 'Teacher, what shall we do?'" Now keep in mind that tax collectors were Jews who were working for the Roman government. This was a diabolical plan on the part of Rome. Probably it occurred among all of the peoples that Rome had captured and had become subservient to Rome. They would use their own folk to collect the Roman tax. Now think about what that does. It means that the hatred of the people then is divided between their conqueror, Rome, and one of their own who is working in behalf of Rome. And not only that, but it was well known that tax collectors lived the high life. And how did they do it? They were paid their salary by Rome, and then whatever else they could tax on the people beyond what Rome demanded, they would receive and live off of. Think of Zacchaeus, a tax collector, and how he didn't hang with the people and nobody was going to let him in front of the parade route that Jesus was coming by on, and so he had to climb that tree because he was short. So the tax collectors say, "What then should we do in order to prepare for the coming of the kingdom of God?" And in reply, John says to them, "Collect no more than the amount prescribed to you." Well, that's a pretty simple thing. Soldiers also asked him. These soldiers were, of course, Roman soldiers who were listening in. And what should we do? And John said to them, do not extort money from anyone by threats or false accusations, and be satisfied with your wages. Well, in a way similar to that of the tax collectors, the soldiers were not very well paid, but Rome turned a blind eye when they would go out into the countryside and threaten poor people on the outskirts of the culture and society, on the outskirts of towns where there were no people to rally in justice for them. And so the soldiers, I won't say they lived as well as tax collectors, but the soldiers lived better than their wages. So here are these practical things. They don't sound very religious at all. What are we to do? If you've got 2 coats and you see somebody that has none, loan them yours. If you've got extra food and you see somebody that doesn't, give them some food. If you're a tax collector, only collect what is required by the law to collect. If you're a soldier, be content with your wages. These are social responses in preparation for the coming of the King. I think our challenge is similar in this. When we think of Advent and our own preparation to receive afresh the Christ child, where are we able to make differences in our community? We don't have to go beat the bushes for things that don't happen here, but in the way of folks who have less, in the way of folks who are lonely, in the way of folks who have no family around to celebrate during the holidays. All these kinds of ways which, on the one hand, don't seem very religious, yet on the other are symbols of our own preparation to be open to the kingdom of God, in which no one goes hungry, no one is without a coat, no one is ever lonely. Why, it pairs quite well with the Zephaniah text, as Zephaniah also envisions the coming of the Lord. This will end our lesson, and I'll look forward to seeing you on Sunday, December the 9th, at our Sunday school class at 9:30. Thanks for watching and tuning in.